So this is the fourth in what I originally intended to be a three-part series of lectures on digital musicology. And when I started the series, I intended to speak about what I saw as the opportunities, problems, and new methods that would appear when we integrated computers into the study of music. And so that planned out the series. But as my thinking evolved and my work developed, particularly in the past year when I became appointed the head of digital humanities at MIT, I began to realize that the series was going to be incomplete unless I spoke about specific tools used in digital musicology, results from my own field, and also had some ideas about how the study of music using computers could be connected to the entire project of the study of humanities and humanistic disciplines with digital technologies. In previous talks in the series, I was stressing the importance of using all the methods at our disposal in the study of music history, including those requiring statistical or computational knowledge in order to achieve results. What I didn't stress as much but will be the focus of today's talk, are the collections of tools that enable us to step back from the study of individual works of music, individual scores, individual recordings, instead survey a much broader field of music history. What do we gain when our focus is not really a focus at all, instead an aerial view of hundreds or thousands of musical pieces? And conversely, what is lost when we drop the process of close listening, of close and careful study of individual details, instead survey a landscape? And in the past, we really didn't need to answer those rhetorical questions. For there really was no way for one person to know thousands or tens of thousands of musical pieces, at least at the level of detail that allowed sort of near infallible knowledge of what happens in each passage of imperceptible detail. And so a lot of people are here from the music side and some people from other sides. For our colleagues in textual disciplines have been, such as comparative literature, have been wrestling with this problem a lot longer than we have in musicology and music theory. The vast expansion of textual sources available for quick searching and retrieval and study that the internet and particularly repositories, Google Books, have brought to the forefront of literary scholarship, at least in some parts of these fields, the questions of what's gained or what's lost when we move from the close study of a text to a distant view, or to use the term brought forth by Moretti, distant reading. Now, with some exceptions, such as the work of Nicholas Cook, David Huron, more recently Quinn, Sapp, Tomochko, Chris White, Joanna Divani, and in musicology, these questions have really not been as prominent in our discourse and scholarship. And a key difference between music and literature, history, anthropology, and other primarily textually oriented disciplines is that not only do we lack these large repositories of well-encoded musical scores, and I'm going to be talking mostly about scores. I would love audio study to be more of my focus and the focus of a lot more of traditional musicology, but at present, it hasn't been for me. But not only do we lack these repositories, but also the very tools of large-scale digital scholarship, such as musical equivalents of concordancers and search engines. And the tools that did exist, and that I think even though I'm one of the builders, I can say do exist still, are difficult to use, and sometimes require specialist knowledge, even for the act of encoding works, let alone being able to use these tools to summarize or search repositories or repertories. And there are a lot of other technical limitations, difficulties I could go on about, but there was also something more important that hadn't yet occurred in the field of musicology that's been holding us back. And that is, for decades, there have been musical scholars like me, like the people mentioning, who have been promising a digital future where all this could be done, musical scores could be studied, large numbers, but really the results have been lacking. In particular, I speak about the lack of results about the types of questions that we had traditionally been asking in the discipline through close studies of individual scores. Questions such as, how or why did a particular style evolve? How are individual pieces connected? What can we learn about the dating of repertories? Or were there disjunctions in a composer's musical style at the moment, before and after, say, a major event in her biography? And without proof of the ability of computational musicology to answer fundamental questions about music, the types of questions that traditional non-digital musicologists were asking, the field seemed destined to live in the limbo of what I've called elsewhere, being perpetually the most promising subdiscipline of musicology, forever winning the most improved award, but never actually getting there. So as much as tools, what's needed in the field of music scholarship are examples of successes, any, at answering these questions. And these successes need to be presented along with honest discussion about the difficulty, training, and time commitment necessary to answer them. Answers to long-standing questions that require these computational tools can often be more difficult than we're selling them as. And we're not there yet. Digital musicology still needs to present more solutions than promises. But I hope today to give an introduction to the field and to give at least one answer that I'm particularly interested in, particularly proud of, from my main research field of 14th century music. And I know that that's a quite distant period. That's even though I see it as one of vast beauty and a repertory for which there's much to be discovered, but I think that what I'm talking about, medieval music, has insights that may be open to scholarship throughout musicology, and by extension, I hope, again, to other parts of the humanities, which have been less well served by the digital tools that do exist. And I think, to get all biographical at the beginning, what are we calling it? Autoethnography. My work in this field began about 15 years ago when I was in grad school, spending money by working as a computer consultant for an economics research bureau, and really, I was doing things for them, and I just got, every time I worked for them, I got more and more jealous that they weren't needing to use computer tools that were built for somebody else, but that specialized tools and also less specialized but focused computational languages on the statistics that were used by economists were allowed them to create whatever new small tools and create insights about whatever they had been researching at the time. And at the same time, I was trying to organize my dissertation, which was on about 100 Italian fragments from the Trecento and the 14th century. And I saw that they could search through their data rapidly to find out exactly what the main trends were, and also, always equally importantly, what the outliers of that trends were that they can be so fascinating to study. And so it was kind of there that I started thinking about what tools like this would work for music, and tools that were specialized for music, that reflected how music's actually structured, not looking at the level of individual notes reduced to numbers. And I had seen the potential for this in earlier software, especially a remarkable collection of tools created in the late 80s and 90s, like the person I already mentioned, David Huron, at Ohio State, called Humdrum. But I also knew that there's sort of this, I saw this looked up, there's sort of a trend that you could name your software packages something sort of self-deprecating. It's anything but humdrum. But I also knew about new programming paradigms that weren't that new, but they had become ascendant since the development of humdrum, such as object-oriented class-based structures, reusable libraries, and tight integration with visualization, or in the case of music, notation tools. And I believe then, and still do, that these, a new organization for musicology software would enable, that brought in these ideas, especially object-oriented programming, would enable a set of rich analysis tools where we could move back and forth among levels of detail, from scanning a score as a whole, through zooming in on individual phrases, down to individual measures, chords and pitches, and then back out again. And I think that that's sort of at the core of the organization of the tools that I was making. And I also wanted to create a system that would be far simpler to use than anything that had gone before, and I think this is a goal I've achieved. And I wanted it to be simple enough that a musicologist with no previous training in programming could get results in only a few days or a week, and this is a goal I have not. And I still try to reach it, but I'm beginning to suspect it might not be possible. And I want to start being more and more honest about that. So the tool for computational musicology, which with a team of collaborators I ended up making, is called music21. It's named after the number MIT is assigned to music and humanities. I think MIT's motto really should be, why use a word when a number would do? And it's an open source collection of related libraries and tools written in the Python programming language that enables scholars and almost probably more often artists use it to examine and manipulate elements of musical scores as easily as programming languages, or I hope as easily as programming languages natively work with texts and numbers. So here's an example of the music21 code for analyzing the meter of a passage of a piece by Bach. Perhaps to find unusual stress patterns in the meter that accord with stress patterns in the text. So this code loads in a single chorale and stores it as the variable BWV11.6, which is right. Then extracts out, we'll just look at the alto part, say, and then just make it fit on the slide. We'll look at an excerpt, measures 13 to 20, put it there, and then we'll start using tools that already existed. This is a kind of a Laird Jackendorfer thing for people that need something to, where we're going to label the beat depth or something. We're going to show it. And one of the things that I've always noticed, is that in the amount of time it takes to explain something like this, a competent music theorist could have done this. And that's almost always the case when we show something with computers. So you never get any of the benefit until we change that first line into a loop. And suddenly, with a change of one line, we can be doing the same analysis and finding the same outliers and finding the same trends on, we'll just iterate, run through every one of the Bach chorales. And so what all of the time is spent in the initial development and getting the computer to do one little excerpt, but instead, of course, it can be done in a minute or two after that on the entire repertoire of Bach chorales. And so I really intended music21 to set up a lot of tools for people to look at, say, correlations among musical elements, which is one of the things that statistically is most interesting to do. I was always taught that higher pitches are louder, and so, but I know that we perceive them, they are played louder, but are they ever marked with, do they tend to be marked with higher dynamic levels, and being able to plot these kinds of graphs and see that, at least in a lot of the core repertoire, there doesn't seem to be any sort of connection there. Looking at how different composers use their pitches was very interesting. I always like that Schumann's works tend to use pitches quite often in saying like a nice bell curve, using middle pitches more often and less as you trail it out. Chopin looks kind of like a badly designed city, and it kind of looks like Abu Dhabi, something like that. For when he finds a particular, I think this is a particular G sharp in one octave, he'll just keep using that one later. An important thing in any computational toolkit, of course, is the ability to produce absolutely worthless 3D charts where you can't see anything, but they're always good for getting more funding. And then being able to integrate, one of the changed paradigms is being able to use other people's libraries. So being able to look at geographic information libraries and be able to plot out how musical differences go with geographic changes. And for instance, a large change is sort of move north and west in Chinese folk music in the use of sevenths in among pieces. And one of the important things that I've used the system the most for is being able to find sort of exceptional moments that we can explain with various voices and things. But this is an excerpt of a piece by Josquin, and there's one moment in here which uses, for those who are 20th century analysts, a pitch class collection that that you might not see in Renaissance music, and it's very hard to find from there, but once we run it through a system called chordification, where you slice up every moment, it becomes very easy to look for these little markers of extreme sort of contrapuntal intersections. And a lot of the music that's been encoded more recently that's freely available on the internet is actually the music that sort of should at least be freely available, the copyrighted popular music of recent years, and being able to track the difference in group motion by how much it moves from the 50s and 60s, fourths and fifths being everywhere, and being able to look over time at the increased prevalence of seconds, and being able to have a computer system that can try to date compositions is kind of fun. But one of the things I've really interested in is that we can start looking at repertories, and I'll go back to the chorales. Everybody still seems to occupy a central role in computational music theory, just as it used to in theory itself. So we can ask a question. Here's the music21 code for figuring out what is every piece in the corpus of Bach chorales that is in minor, that ends in minor, that's primarily in minor, but does not end with this happy major, security third, whatever you want to call it, major triad at the end, but instead is a minor triad. And so able to go through and isolate all of these places pretty interestingly. But at this point, we haven't gotten to any of the questions that musicology should be really interested in. It does not substitute for analysis. It helps make analysis more efficient. So we can look through all of them and find out that, except for the Christmas oratorio, every other usage of this piece is from a chorale that the authenticity by some has been in doubt, or that at least the tradition hasn't been there. So basically things like that. For people who are teaching music theory, you really don't want your students to get a hold of the code that finds every single parallel fifth in every Bach chorale, but it's kind of fun to find. Some of them are explained by various parts of theory, but others you can kind of start making new theory from soprano, parallel fifth, tenor, and so on. One of the things that's always been important that I've loved in the toolkit is that, unlike if you were going to prepare an analysis like this by hand, which you could do, as soon as you finish looking at the complete repertory of the Bach chorales, you would be no faster, or maybe only a little bit faster, at turning to another repertory. But as soon as I finished this code over here, I just went and changed the word Bach to Monteverdi several times, and I found all of the cases there. So basically, what I'll say about Music21, and happy to talk more about that in a bit. So it was publicly released in May 2010, and in the past 8 years, its capabilities and user base have grown, but it's only been in really the last very few years that I've been able to step back from the work in developing it and finally start using it myself to apply its capabilities to my own work and research questions. And so I'll be moving toward that for this sort of the last half of the talk. Among the most difficult problems in the study of medieval music are identifying chains of influence and connections, discerning similarities in musical style, attributing or possibly attributing anonymous works, and for a great number of pieces, even figuring out what work we're actually looking at, or even which side is up. And part of the problem is that the vast majority of sources of medieval polyphonic music are fragments, often in terrible states of preservation. And searching among the entire repertory for connections is too much for a single scholar to do for more than a few pieces. So this is where it generally turn. For identifying one of these fragments as a quotation or part of a work, that maybe not necessarily a well-known work, but a work that was well-known that we didn't know was well-known, usually involves hunting through all 25 volumes of polyphonic music of the 14th century, with 7 volumes of early 15th century music, and approximately 3 volumes of material discovered since these series were completed. And that's what we do when we're trying to identify one excerpt. The question that I was interested in was, can we find whether any connections, any quotations, any citations have been missed, and anywhere. And so the problem that happens is that as the number of pieces to be studied increases, so as we get to 30 some odd volumes, or 2,500 pieces, the numbers of possible intersections, the number of pairs of pieces increases by the square of the number of works. So to study whether any of thousands of pieces are cited or quoted in any other piece, millions of pairs of pieces would have to be considered. For the 14th century, that number is about 3 million. So clearly it'd be impossible for any scholar to systematically comb through any possible pair of pieces to look for the citation. And so this is really where I built Music21 for myself, to automate the process of identifying unknown ones. And also in order to do this, I created a digital repertory called, I call MSAP, Electronic Medieval Music Score Archive Project. And that's a complete encoding of the corpus of 14th and early 15th century music. So basically, what we did was we started from the published editions, just entered them all into a computer using Finale, Similarity, so on. And then all of these things are transferred into Music XML. Some people like MEI, I'm a Music XML person. And then, so you can kind of see the first 2 measures of that piece, encre et feu, become encoded as this much code over here. Basically, everybody that I talked to in the medieval field said that I needed to go back to the original manuscripts and re-encode in order to make sure that there were no mistakes. But I will, I'm glad to talk to in sort of Q&A about the importance of not trying to get everything right in order to get things done here. And even at this level of accuracy, the project took about 5 years and $40,000 to complete. So the encoding of all these pieces does nothing for scholars except for saving an occasional trip to the bookshelf. So we needed to have specialized Music21 tools in order to look for these encodings. So what I've done is I've used Music21 to automatically chop up every piece of music, or every part of the piece of music, into segments of about 30 notes in length. And each of the segments overlaps each other quite a bit, so that the position where the chop takes place is not particularly important. Now, each of these segments is then automatically transformed into a simple alphabetic code, similar to those used in projects like Mendel, Ham, and Lockwood in the 60s and 70s. The code that I found most useful, something like this, is just encoding, for medieval music, just encoding the letter name without sharps or flats, because they tend to change, and whether or not the note is shorter or longer than the previous one. That way, differences in additions sort of get smoothed out. So this is an example of that opening passage, encre et feu, this this unique piece of French music from the 14th century encoded. So currently there's about 188,000 segments of music in the MSAT database, and that beautiful opening phrase, I should have sang it or something, is unceremoniously stored as ID 154657, kind of like the Ark in the Indiana Jones film. The segment compares this, the system compares this segment with a random other segment, and then generates the series of operations in order to transform the first segment into the second one. In this case, the two melodies are highly dissimilar, so there's a lot to change. Finally, and most importantly, the system reduces this information to a single number between 0 and 10,000, representing the 0 to 100% similarity. Here the melodies are a measly 17% similar, but they're just two segments. In the next step, every one of the 188,000 segments is compared to every other one of the 188,000 segments, resulting in 35 billion comparisons, taking about 18 hours to run. I stored only those pairs of segments that were at least 50% similar, and that trimming resulted in only 814,000 pairs of pieces to look at. And one of the great things about it is, as I've been looking at them randomly, all of them have some audible level of similarity, but they're not actually, generally pieces by the same composer or from the same genre, but it's still way too much to investigate. So I kept raising the bar over and over until about 65% similarity was enough for me to look at. And that's about 700 pairs of pieces. That kept me busy for about a year just looking at them. Above, at this sort of 70% similarity level, almost everything that's there is an actual quotation. And the difference, why they're not, even if they're exact quotation, why they're not 100% similar is because of differences in editing, or because those different chopped up segments happen to get chopped up at different places. And so there should be about 181 new quotations or concordances, but of course many of these had already been identified. The computer doesn't read critical notes or journals or something, so they were all presented to me as new, and sometimes I thought they were new because I didn't know about them. So this is what happens when I run the software. Results come in, and scores are generated that show sort of two fragments of music that might be related, and I really try to look at them as quickly as I can, but then usually another one pops up right in front, so I have to wait until it's all done to do it. And so it's a pretty tedious process. When this becomes a CSI episode or something, this is what I really hope it can look like, and what everybody thinks, but it's not nearly this glamorous. Again, you gotta keep the funders happy. So for people who are really interested in 14th century music, I have another half of a talk that I'm not going to give today, where I really go through all of the things that are sort of being found and coming up. But that's not really the main focus of today's talk. I'm not going to talk about things like a new candidate for the earliest parody mass, evidence for melodic harmonization a century before was previously thought to be the main way of using things, or the source for Guillaume Domachot's last unidentified motet tenor. But what's been more important to me than any individual connection is the sheer number of new concordances and quotations that the system unearthed. There were 50 at my last count, in a field where 1 or 2 or 3 generally makes for fine careers work. But even more importantly, nothing that is in this system really is specific to 14th century music. The programs are generalizable to any repertory that's been encoded. And I believe this exact implementation would work if you rented a little bit of computer time from Amazon on repertories about 10 to 50 times the size. My favorite throw-off lines is we've waited 600 years to know this. We can wait another day or two. And I think that we should be working with computer scientists to develop techniques that should take us about an order or two, 10 to 100 times more than that, 50 times more, to be able to start looking at 16th and probably getting up to 17th century music as repertoire. But for me, very importantly, as I said, I've been working on quotation and concordance up until recently, because these are two things that once the system points out to you that these two pieces use the same 30 measures, or these two pieces are the same or something, it's very easy to verify that it's true. But a lot of what I think we can be doing now and what's going forward is the system's giving us great information also about those similarities in musical style I mentioned that can be used to aid in attributions of anonymous pieces and works with conflicting attributions. In one case, there was one of these segments that had no exact matches, but had 7 matches that were above that 60% threshold, and none of them were the same thing. But all 7 of those pieces were by the same composer, Johannes Ciccone. So I figure this has to be something that we can put in. Not only finding new pieces by composers we already thought were very important, which everybody likes, but one of the things that you can finally do with the computer system is start attributing pieces to these composers that we know almost nothing about. That when somebody says, there's some anonymous piece out there, they say, oh, it has to be by Bach. It sounds so much like Bach, and you say, but if it's not by Bach, who else could it be? If it's not Bach, it's probably by Handel. And it's like, if those are the only 2 Baroque composers well, of course everything sounds like Bach and Handel. So for the computer, it's just as happy to say that some anonymous piece is most similar in style to somebody that we know nothing about, that we only have one other piece by, than it is to think that it will get a new publication by saying this is a lost work by Michaud. And preliminary work by my student Sarah Rumbley suggests that machine learning techniques on this repertory are doing very well at attributing known works accurately. So I tell the computer it's anonymous, we actually know who it is. It says, who is it? And it's doing about 85% accuracy, which is at least closer than we thought before. So when the field is willing to accept computational style analysis, we may be able to look at a wider repertory of currently anonymous pieces as being influenced by or by known composers. So I'm going to wrap up here, and by talking about by connecting what my work has been up to with other trends in the use of computers in the humanities. The many strands of digital humanities, from digital presentations of work and research materials, to using technology to advocate for social change in and out of scholarship, to unlocking the potential of our teaching, have all been extremely valuable and important to our field. But I hope that across the humanities, we do not neglect the essential role that developing our own tools will play in broadening humanities access in the future. We need software that is attuned to how we, as humanists, approach problems and questions. If it is true that no software can be free of bias, at least let them be our own disciplinary biases and not those of Silicon Valley. I'm heartened, for instance, by developments in recent years in natural language processing that have been attuned to understanding rather than negating ambiguity, and have also focused their attention on languages such as Latin and Sanskrit that have no market value, but immense possibilities and interest for many of us. I also think that with the emphasis, for better or for worse, on CS encoding of many of our universities, our political figures, leaders right now, I'll say figures, and students that show the possibilities that, I shouldn't put in parentheses. I also believe that with the emphasis of CS and coding of many of our universities, political leaders, and students, that showing the potential of humanities coding will be an important way of increasing the reach of the humanities to groups of students who never realized that our questions, our projects, could be so compelling and so relevant, and also so in need of their own particular contributions and expertise. So this is the direction that we'll be taking in the new undergraduate-focused digital humanities lab that I'm leading at MIT, trying to use the undergraduate skill in coding to solve problems in conjunction with professors. I hope that by giving tools to place distance between ourselves and the vast repositories and repertories of the liberal arts, we can create a much closer affinity between the young coders and the humanities. Thank you.